Hello everyone, FPL Raps here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, the first video of 2022, we're going to be doing something slightly different. We're going to be looking back at a retrospective look at the season so far. We've got a bit of a gap in games and as a result we don't have to churn out the same team selection and game week preview content. So this week there'll be some slightly different videos. I did give you the choice of which video you'd like to see for this week over on the YouTube community feature. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, make sure you've got notifications on so you know when those posts go live. But you guys chose as the most voted for 39% at the time of recording a mid-season review, what we've learnt so far, what conclusions we can draw from not only my season but how the season's gone in general. And let me tell you, this video is packed with information that can hopefully help us improve for the second half of the season as well. The other four choices that you could have chosen were all Psychology 101 videos and they were highly voted for still. So as a treat, rather than just doing one, I'm going to do two videos this week, and the second video will be a Psychology 101 video, and that will likely be on the role of gut feeling in FPL and whether we should trust gut feeling or we should just go for the analytical, logical, statistical side of the game. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. It's completely free for you guys to do, but it massively helps support me and support the channel. Without further ado, let's jump into today's video. So if you've watched my channel for a while, you'll know I'm a fairly organised person anyway, and I do have timestamps in every single video, and I try to structure them in a really coherent manner because that's just the way that my brain works. But this video in particular, because I'm going to be covering so much content, and I expect it to be quite a long video, I'm not sure how long at this stage, I just wanted to quickly go through what the structure is so that if you don't have all the time in the world and there is just one specific thing you want to know about, you know what the timestamps mean, you know where to skip to, if that makes sense. Almost like I do for my lectures, this is what's going to be in today's lecture. So we're going to start with what if I did nothing. So there's a brilliant website, and by the way, I'm going to be using websites throughout the entire video today. I will say what they are in the video, but I'll also link them in the description if you want to go and check these things for yourself. So we'll start with a what if I did nothing. There's a great website where you can find out if you just kept your team from game week 1, the captaincy, the bench exactly as it is, how many points would you be on? So it basically tell you what your captaincy decisions and transfers have earned you with respect to extra points. Then going to go through how effective my general choices have been across the season, look at sort of a broad overarching look at all of that. Topic 3 is going to be the discussion of season progress so far. That's mainly around rank, and we're just going to take a look at how my season has progressed. After that, we're going to go through have my transfers been effective, and if not, where have I potentially made some mistakes. Then going to go through my captaincy, and we'll also have a bit of a meta discussion around captaincy. Should we perm a captain? Would that put me in a better position than I currently am in? We'll go through all of that. Obviously, it's very, very topical at the moment with Salah out at AFCON as well. We're then going to move away from my season and move to the best value players, looking at price and points. So we're going to take into account price as well as total points and look at if there are any gems that have been going under the radar. And let me just give you a little spoiler. There are definitely gems that we have not considered that are definitely brilliant value and that we might want to consider for the second half of the season. We're then going to go through the best defenders, midfielders and forwards according to expected data, so underlying stats. We'll go through are there any gems? Are there any people who've missed out? And if so, are we expecting them to perform well for the second half of the season? Then we're going to go through the current state of play. How many managers have used their chip? Specifically, free hit is a really interesting one to know. How many have used their first free hit, potentially their second one as well? And then have a look at the differences in ranks. If you're ranked at 1 million, what realistically can you hope to achieve by the end of the season? Is it top 10k, top 100k? Can you only realistically receive top 500k? If you're currently 100k, can you get through to the top 1k? So have a bit of discussion around how tightly grouped we are at the midway point of the season. And then we're going to go through my major lessons that I've learned and my advice moving forward. It's very difficult in a season like this with COVID and with postponements to try and draw too many conclusions, but there are definitely things that I think we can say we've learned and that we can use for the second half of the season and hopefully improve and shoot up the ranks as well. So that is a really, really quick introduction to what we're going to be going through today. As I said, there will be timestamps in the video, probably slightly more specific than these, and you can skip to that section. For those of you that are just going to stick with me for the entire video, hopefully it's an interesting one. Let's jump into it. Right, so the start of the video is more of a bit of fun as opposed to being completely informational, but I do think it's really cool to look at. We often look at this over on Twitter. So as I said, I will say what the websites are, but if you're interested in any of the sites that I've used, because I've used about 4 or 5 different sites in this video, you can go into the links in the description and click on those. I'm not getting any money for advertising. These are all free to use sites, but they're just the sites that I've used to create the content for today's video. So the first is called like a what if machine. So this is from game.change.co.uk, but the full link is in the description because it isn't just an FPL site. And they've created a code which allows you to see what your team looks like from the start of the season from game week 1. And if you'd kept that exact team, you didn't change your captaincy, you didn't change your bench order, you didn't change the starting 11, you didn't transfer players out if they got injured, how your team would perform if you kept that exact team. So what this essentially tells you is what is the result of your tinkering? How much is your tinkering, whether that be transfers, captaincy, just changing your bench order, how much has that benefited you? Your wild card, your free hit, all of these different things. Let me tell you, you would think 500, 600 points. You'd think it would be a massive improvement. I have done this in previous seasons, and sometimes across an entire season, your transfers and captaincy don't end up helping you. That might be because your captaincy at the start of the season, if you'd perma-captain, it might have been better. It might be that you take out a player that goes on to haul and you bring in the wrong keeper. For example, I can't remember what season it was when Nick Pope started hauling regularly. I took Pope out on a wild card, and my Game Week 1 team had Pope in it. So there's things like that where actually you being actively managing your team isn't actually going to help your team. So anyway, so this is my Game Week 1 team. Sanchez, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Shaw, Tsimikas, Gundogan, Salah, captain. So Salah's captain throughout, obviously that's going to help. Fernandes, Benrahma, Ings, Wilson, and Antonio as my starting 11. Some players in there, I'm really wondering why they were in my team. My bench is Foster, obviously on the bench. Brownhill first sub, so if any of my starting 11 miss out and there's only one of them, Brownhill comes on. I've got Cody second sub, and Cody's actually done pretty well this season with 77 points so far, and Luke Ayling was third sub. So that is my 11. This is how the team would perform then. So after it gives you the team and what the points were. If you just then move on after that, it will give you a little bit of information about that. So that team, if I'd have kept it as it is and just used the auto subs and the auto vice captain, that team would have scored me 1,160 points from Game Week 1. With 109 points coming off the bench via automatic subs and 1 extra point from the vice captain when the captain didn't play. Obviously, Salah's only missed 1 game, I believe, so it would have only been 1 game that I didn't have Salah captain. Obviously, Salah would have been the perfect captain, 177 points he scored already, roughly the midway point of the season. So he's looking at a 300-point plus season, which is absolutely remarkable. And of course, Salah would have been the perfect captain then. My current team value is 104.1 million. If I'd have made no transfers, my team value would have been 99.3. So points aside for just a second, you can see that one of the major advantages of making transfers and actively managing your team is that you're able to bring in players that are obviously performing well and therefore going up in price, specifically when you use your wildcard as well. So my team value is up 4.8 million on top of what it would have been if I'd have not touched my team, which is obviously a major advantage for when you use the second wildcard later in the season. My current actual points are 1,316, and I've made 29 transfers, not including the wildcard. So that means my transfer activity and captaincy choices has been worth a total of 156 points. Now, you might think that's not a lot. I'm actually quite happy with that. I'd like to, so I'm going to ask you to do various things throughout this video because I just like interacting with you guys. But if you go to that same website, again, the link will be in the description, type in your team ID as you do when you go to like livefpl.net or fpl.team. Type in your ID. Let me know how many points your captaincy and your transfers has been worth. I'm going to be very, very interested to hear it. If you consider the fact that me taking the captaincy off of Salah has cost me points, it probably means that my transfers have been pretty effective. Whether that's the wildcard or whether that's transfers in and around that, we'll discuss that later on in the video. But 156 extra points is a good thing. It at least means that my extra tinkering has been worth it. What I would say is that's not a crazy difference. So what that does mean is that if you make a wrong transfer here and there, an incorrect transfer, and it backfires, just think that's not the end of the world. Across 21 game weeks, it's only been 156 points. So if you take an extra hit here and there, or you make one transfer that doesn't quite pay off straight away, it's again not the end of the world. And I think that's nice to know a bit of comfort there. But 156 points is pretty decent. My current rank at the time of me making the graphic is 37,240. Obviously, we're midway through Game Week 21, so that could get better or worse. My what-if rank, if I hadn't made any transfers to change my captaincy, would be 999,493. So I'd essentially be ranked 1 million if I had a zombie team, which, to be honest, is pretty good. No transfers, no changing captaincy. I'd still be in the top 1 million, which is cool. But it's great to see that I'm now ranked 37k and that my transfers and captaincy have at least been a major contributor to that. So that's just an entertaining way to start the video and just to show that it is worth actively managing our team. However, my Game Week 1 team was probably pretty good then. There was definitely a few good picks in there. The fact that it's ranked at 1 million, again, let me know down below. I'd like to know how many points your transfers and captaincy have earned you, which would be a really interesting one. And the second one I'd like to know is what is your what-if rank? If you hadn't changed your team, if you kept your team exactly the same, what would your current rank be? We'll try and see who's got the highest potentially. So one of the best FPL sites in general is Premier Fantasy Tools. Again, I'm not paid by any of the companies or brands or websites that I'm using in this video. The only company that I work with is Fantasy Football Fix. I don't even think I've used them in this video, so I'm not getting paid to say any of this stuff. A lot of them are free. Some of them you can have paid subscriptions, but Premier Fantasy Tools is great for a lot of things. And I suppose it's best for what we're doing now, where you're analysing your decision making, you're analysing your picks, your captaincy, your transfers, and I'll use it throughout this video. But one of the things that I like is it can give you this sort of broad overarching meta. You'll see me use the word meta a lot. I've taken that off of Late Riser and the FPLY. They use that word a lot and I really like it. This meta look at my season and which of my game weeks have I made effective decisions. Now, this takes into account a number of things, your benching decisions, your captaincy, etc. But this tells you, based on the team that you've got, how effective were the decisions that you made. For those of you that the writing's too small, which will probably be for most of you, a green line is over 90%. A yellow line is from 75% to 90%, and then red is from 75% and below. So really what you want is every single week you'd like the line to be green. That would tell you that you've made effective decisions in your team. If it's yellow, you've made relatively effective decisions. Then if it's red, it means that you've probably got the wrong captaincy and you've got loads of points benched or something like that, and you could have made better decisions with your team. So I just thought we'd start with this because, like I said, it's quite a meta look at the season. We're going to go into transfers, captaincy, really specific things throughout the season, value players, etc. But this is more of an overarching look at the season. As you can see, generally really good. Only 2 game weeks this season are below 75% effectiveness. That's game week 11 and game week 18. Game week 18, it was the week where loads of players ended up missing. I think I only fielded 7 or 8 players. My captain was Foden, I believe, who didn't play. So that's the reason that's so bad, is that I didn't even field a full 11. So that doesn't look like a very effective use of my transfers and captaincy, etc. And then game week 11 was the one where I benched 32 points. Now, if you remember the bench, if you've been following my channel for a while, it was Foster saved a penalty against Arsenal. Norman got a 9-pointer from CDM. I think Emerson Royale got a 6-pointer. There was some really random scores in there that I was just never going to play those players. So if we take into account the fact that I'm pretty happy with my game week 11, yes, I could have captained Salah. I think I captained away from Salah. Game week 11 was just a lot of points on the bench. And game week 18, I couldn't have done much about because of COVID and postponements. And I tried fielding 11 players. I'm pretty happy with my decisions this season. And you can see that the way that we approach things on this channel, not just me, but the way I advised you to do it as well, is it's very methodical, it's quite logical, it's quite patient, and this season it has paid off generally. Of course, there's a lot of luck involved in this, especially early on in the season. I was quite lucky, and I will be happy to admit that I was very lucky early on in the season. But generally speaking, across the season, I've made pretty effective decisions with the 15 players that I've got, which is really, really positive. What you will notice across my season, and it's not just about my season, this video, don't worry, we're going to move on to some other stuff as well. I started the season really well, and I'm going to say struggled, but I didn't struggle, but I had a slightly suboptimal middle of the season, or midway through this half of the season, about a quarter of the way through. So game week 6 to game week 12-ish, I really, really struggled. And as you'll see when we get onto the captaincy, I went away from Salah quite a few times between game week 6 and game week 12. That's probably the reason that you can see there that it's yellow and fluctuating between 75 and 90% rather than being in the green, is that I kept trying to captain against Salah and it just was not working. And I think I quickly clocked on to the fact that most weeks, Salah's probably the optimal captain. And maybe when we look at the lessons learned later on in the video, the final section, I could have maybe been a little bit more adaptive and adapted early to realizing, crap, Salah is incredible. Salah's in this amazing form. Captain Salah and find another way to improve your rank. But it took me a few weeks to clock on to that, and maybe in future seasons I can be a little bit quicker to adapt, or maybe start the season by captaining the safe premium pick that's playing well, and then after that look elsewhere. So maybe I'm being a little bit harsh on myself. I've had a pretty good season. As I said, I'm in around 35k, potentially could be even better because I've still got 5 double game week players to go in 21. But it looks like that middle section of the season is where I started to struggle slightly. So what I would advise you do is do this for yourself before you start looking at really individual things. And then you can see where's the part of the season where I struggled, or where's the part of the season I did really well. If you did really well in 5 game weeks, look back. Is that due to some decisions you made? Is it due to captaincy? Or is it due to a bit of luck? Sometimes it's just lucky. Like the first 5 game weeks, I didn't really have to make any transfers because whether it's luck or good decision making, I'll leave that up to you guys to decide. My game week 1 team was brilliant. It really was. It set me up in a perfect position. You can see I scored 109 points. I was 40, 50k. Then I got up to about 20, 25k at one point. And I was just performing really well because my game week 1 team was perfect. I didn't make a transfer till game week 3, and I only made 1 transfer. I then decided to take a -4 in game week 4 to get Jota in. But largely speaking, because I had Ben Rama and Antonio, I had a really well set up team from the start. I didn't have to make any transfers. So that's a bit of luck. It's a bit of good decision making, but it's definitely worthwhile addressing across the season. But just remember that game week 6 to game week 12 period when we get to the captaincy section, because you can see that's the reason there where you can see there's a few red and also some yellow as well. Let's move on to the next section. As I said, we're not just going to be talking about how my season's gone so far. We will be talking about things that we've learned. But of course, you can learn from this as well. Just because this isn't your season, this isn't the decisions you've made. You can learn from the mistakes I've made or the good decisions I've made. And what I'd advise you to do is to do something similar to this. Of course, I've done this for your entertainment and as content. But I've learned a few things doing this, and it's good to look back, not only in FPL, but in your everyday life. I don't want to talk too much about things outside of FPL because I could talk for hours, but generally speaking, this is why I'm so interested in psychology, the way we behave, the way we think. It's so important for progression in life and improvement. You can always improve at whatever you do. And the best way to improve is to look back, analyze your decision making, analyze what went well, but most importantly, what you could have done better. Because in everything we do, even if you achieve 100% in an exam, you could have potentially done something slightly more effectively. You can always improve, even if you think you're a master of something. And if you take that attitude throughout life, then you will continue to improve, and it will improve not only in the thing that you're trying to improve in, but that will also transfer to other skills and other parts of your life as well. So that ramble over. This is my season progression so far, and this is taken from the FPL site. So if you want to know how to find this, over to fantasypremierleague.com. If you go onto your points and then go onto game week history, you can find out how you've done every single week. What you've got here is you've got game week points, you've got points benched, you've then got game week rank, you've got transfers made, I'm just telling you the codes at the top. You've then got total cost, which tells you like a -4 is like a hit. You've then got your total points, you've got your total rank, and then you've got your team value and whether you've got a green or red arrow. So I look at this every single week just to see how I've been going. So if you take a quick glance at the green and red arrows, you can see I've been up and down quite a lot this season. But generally speaking, if you look at the overall rank, which is the third column from the right, starting with 67,000. That was my Game Week 1 rank. You can see that, generally speaking, it's been very consistent. I've only been outside the top 100k once, and that was in Game Week 9 when I captained Havertz rather than the Havertz gate, rather than captaining Salah. I went from 59k in Game Week 8 to 197k in Game Week 9. So almost up above 200k, and I went straight back down to 78k, and then I haven't left the top 100k again. So generally speaking, very, very consistent. Most of the time it's been around that 50k, 60k mark, but recently I've then pushed back under 50k as well. So I'm trying to fight towards that top 10k. Generally speaking, quite consistent. What I've just highlighted here is I was trying to work out how well you need to perform each week to have a good rank. Now, I know a lot of you will have better ranks than me. I guarantee probably at least 1,000 of the people that watch these videos are ranked higher than 37k in the world at the moment. But generally speaking, I think most people would agree that 37k is a pretty decent rank. So we'll use that as sort of pretty decent. That's what you want to achieve. I've only had 6 game weeks with a game week rank of 500k or better. Now, that is a very, very good game week rank to have 500k or above. But I suppose what I'm highlighting here is to achieve the very best, what you don't need is 10, 15, 20 game weeks where you're absolutely smashing it and you're 15, 20 points above the average. What you need is consistency, because as well as only having 6 game weeks where I'm above 500k, and I'll read them out for you, it was a 67k game week rank, 421k game week rank, 229, 43k, 113k, and 129k. So there are some really good ones in there around 100k or better, but only 6. Outside of that, I've only actually had 2 game weeks so far, which are 3 million or worse. And I would say around 3 million and worse is where you're saying that's a reasonable red arrow there. It obviously does depend on the game week average and in and around that, how tightly packed they are. We're not going to talk too much about mathematics here. But around 3, 4 million or worse, I would say is a bad week. If we say conservatively 3 million is a bad week, apart from game week 21, which is ongoing, and like I said, I've got 5 double game week players, so I would hope it would improve. I've actually only had 2 game weeks, game week 8 and game week 9 back to back, where it has been worse than 3 million. So I've not had a lot of great weeks, only 6 above 500k, which is still pretty good. And I've only had 2 really bad weeks, 3 million or lower, and even those were 3.7 million and 3.3. If you consider there are 8 million teams, yes, a lot are inactive or they're just stupid teams that are created for 1 week. That's not that many bad weeks. That's not that many good weeks. So really, to achieve a really good rank, what you want is you want between 1.5 and 2 million each week. And that's what I've achieved. You can see, I'll read out the rest of them. 1.5 million, 1 million, 2.5 million, 1 million, 550k, 1.1 million, 2 million, 2 million, 1.9 million, 1.1 million. I've had a lot where I've basically achieved the safety score for my week. And it's been a very, very small green or very, very small red. So I suppose you can't decide what game week rank you want. You can't decide how many points you want. But I suppose this is more of a psychological thing about don't panic if you have a couple of bad weeks, because that's fine. As you can see here, I've had 2 really bad weeks. I've had a couple of 2.7, 2.8 millions in there as well. And don't feel like you constantly need to achieve those crazy weeks. Don't constantly chase points in the fear that you need to achieve 20 points above the average to get a really good rank. What you need is consistency. You need to field 11 or 15 players ideally that will tick along nice. You need those glue guys that are going to score you points every week. So the likes of someone like a Rafinha is really nice. Trent Alexander-Arnold, Cancelo. Get the base of your team in there. Make sure that the base of your team is scoring well and there are players that will tick along nicely for you regardless of the fixtures. And then just choose a few different points to try and take those risks. Sometimes those risks will pay off and you'll get a slight green arrow and that will be enough. Some weeks they won't pay off. But as long as you've got those glue guys and that general team that's performing well, and I'm not talking about ownership here, I'm talking about actual points and a good team. As long as you've got that, you should be fine moving forward. So I suppose it's just interesting to look at that you don't need to have crazy good game weeks and it doesn't, and crazy bad game weeks to have a bad rank or a good rank respectively. All you need is just to stay that consistent level. The other thing that I've just noted here is you can see where COVID has just absolutely battered the season. So between game week 1 and game week 15, which is that brown box, I took 2 hits. One -4 in game week 4, which was not forced. That was just because I wanted to get Jota in when Firmino was injured. It ended up not even being a good transfer, and I ended up bringing out Jota on my wild card. But I felt like it was a good opportunity to try and chase. I think I brought in Ronaldo as well. It was Ronaldo and Jota for a -4, and I took out Tsimikas. So that wasn't a necessary -4. It was just me trying to be a little bit aggressive, and it did pay off with Ronaldo, but not so much with Jota. And then the other -4 was in game week 9. That was to bring in and captain Havertz, which was, of course, a disaster. So realistically, I took 2 hits in the first 15 game weeks, I should say. Neither of them paid off massively. And realistically, I could have probably taken none across that part. That is largely due to my game week 1 team going well. My wild card was fairly well set up as well. And I just got pretty lucky with injuries, captaincy, all of that sort of stuff. Everything just sort of aligned itself for those first 15 game weeks. Then COVID hit around game week 16. You can see there that -12 that I took. I didn't need to take the -12, but I did need to take a fairly hefty hit. I had the triple Spurs that had their 2 games postponed in like 3 weeks. It was an absolute disaster. So I made 5 transfers for a total of -12. From there on in, I haven't had a single week where I've only used 3 transfers. So it's been a -12 followed by 5 -4s in a row. So you can see there, they are 2 very, very different things. The reason I've highlighted this is twofold. The first thing is to say that you can see by my green arrows, red arrows, my game week rank, and my overall rank, that in and of themselves, hits are neither good nor bad. There is not a positive of taking a hit nor a negative in and of themselves. It depends on the context. It depends on who you're bringing in. It depends on who you're taking out. And it also depends on your management style as well and how you feel like you can make the most of that hit. Now, that isn't me saying that you should take a -16 every week or me saying that you should just roll the transfer every week. It's saying that address the situation which is right in front of you. If you need to take a hit, take a hit. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And that is something that I've definitely learned this season, which we'll discuss at the end, is that hits aren't inherently banned in and of themselves, which is noted here, because actually my rank is not significantly, but it's about the same as it was in game week 15. I've taken, in that meantime, 32 points in hits, and my rank hasn't barely moved. So definitely adapt to the situation. And that's the second point, is that you should be completely adaptive. Adapt to the situation in front of you. Early on in the season, I didn't need to take hits, so I didn't. Later on in the season, I've needed to take hits. COVID has hit my team really badly. I've needed to try and field 11 players. And also, I've covered up for not having to use chips. And I do think that sometimes hits are a good sort of mediator of not having to use your chips. And therefore, I just felt like in the recent game weeks, I could have taken hits rather than using the chips. And it's fared me fairly well. Since my -12, I was at 50k. I've now taken 32 points of hits in 6 game weeks. I'm at 37k. And I've got a few players left in this game week as well. A lot of rambling in there. I suppose the thing to note is just that to get a good rank, what you need is consistency. And to have consistency, what you need to do is use your transfers to attack, use your transfers to deal with issues as well, and have a core group of 10 or 11 players which you don't have to change too often. That will put you in good stead to have consistent, fairly good game weeks every single week, and also allow you to attack those different weeks and deal with your issues as well. Let's move on to the next section. So I'm not going to talk about transfers for too long, because what I want the purpose of this video to be is what can we learn as a community, as a family on this channel for you and for me moving forward. And I think transfers are very, very specific, especially when you're breaking them down in this much detail and you're actually looking at the players that you've brought in and the players that you've taken out. Maybe at the end of the season, I'll do a very self-centered season review where I specifically look at my transfers, everything to do with me. But I want to sort of move on to the more general stuff and what lessons I can pass on to you guys as well. But what I've used here from Premier Fantasy Tools and also from the new website is anewplayer.net/FPL. The link is in the description. That's the table above me, and the table to the side of me is from Premier Fantasy Tools. It's looking at my transfers and how much I've gained from those transfers. Now, the reason that I like this is it does tell you your immediate gain from those transfers. So have you immediately gained or lost points based on the transfers you've made in that week? It takes into account hits as well, so it's your net point gain or net point loss. The reason I don't like this is it doesn't tell you long-term net gain. So it might be that the player you bring in doesn't do that well in that game week, but for the 5 or 6 game weeks after that, they score loads of points. It doesn't take that into account. And the second thing it doesn't take into account is your general squad structure moving forward. You might make a transfer with bench boost in mind. You might make a transfer to allow you to get a captain in 3 game weeks time, to allow you to move to 2 premiums. So it tells you about, yes, your immediate gain, which is important. You don't want to make a transfer and lose points as a result of that. But it sometimes is worth that sacrifice if you're doing something elsewhere. So I would look at this, I would glance at it, I would look at what you've done well, because you can draw trends from it, but I wouldn't stress too much over it. What I would generally say is a lot of my transfers have resulted in an immediate loss straight away, but I did look into a few more of these, and they have, like I said, they were structure based. And what I would say is when I lose points, they're usually minimal losses. When I gain points, they're usually massive gains. So, for example, there are a couple of transfers that stand out to me. Bringing in Azpilicueta and Son, if you remember, it was shortly before I wildcarded in game week 7. I made a double transfer to bring in Son and Azpilicueta. Both of them scored 10 points as part, and they were 2 free transfers, so both scored 10 points. And the 2 that I took out didn't score barely. I think they scored 0 points or 2 points that week. So that was a massive gain. More recently, I brought in Foden and Watkins as part of the -4. They both scored 12 points, which was absolutely massive. So there have been quite a few transfers across the season that I can point at and say they were fantastic transfers, which gained me a lot. There are very few here which lost me a lot of points. I think the one that stands out, you can see here, is the biggest one, was when I did Antonio to Gelhardt, because he randomly came off the bench and scored. That lost me points. So there are some random ones in there, but generally speaking, you can see the net losses in here is -2 points, -1 point, -2.1, -1 point, -0.4, -2. So when I lose points on transfers, they tend to be quite low. Now, this could be for a number of reasons. It could be luck. It could be good decision making. I think what I've learned this season is when to time my risks. And this is something I've struggled with in the past. I'm trying to use psychology a little bit more. I'm trying to walk the walk as well as talk the talk as well. And we'll discuss that through various Psychology 101 videos. I want to do one on risk taking because I find it very, very interesting. There's so much research on risk taking as well, specifically the role of social media in risk taking, which we'll discuss in a future video. I think it's difficult in FPL when to take your risk and when not to. And I've realized that generally speaking, I think the best thing to do, for me at least, for my management style, is to not take risks, to play fairly safe, to be really, really patient, to tick along nicely. And when you see a clear opportunity to gain, that's when you take the risk. For example, the week before a wild card, to take out Alexander-Arnold and Jota, who they were either blanking or they had a really tough fixture against like a Chelsea or a City. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I saw that was a perfect opportunity for me to bring in 2 players with massive upside before a wild card. That's the sort of time where you take a risk. For example, in a blank game week when Foden and Watkins have fantastic fixtures, who did I take out? Have I got it in front of me? Ronaldo and Mbermo, who I think both blanked because the Manchester United-Brentford game was off. They're the times when you take the risk and you be aggressive. You can take an extra hit. You can bring in those players. In a week where Salah has a pretty nice fixture, that's probably not the week to back against him. For example, taking out Salah 2 weeks ago for me, or last week, whenever it was, that is an opportunity to take a risk. Yes, it was slightly risky, but I saw that the fixtures weren't great. He then blanks when he goes off to AFCON. That's the sort of opportunity that I want to take and I want to jump all over. So I guess what I've learned from this, looking back at what I've maybe done well this season, is timing the risks. And I think that is something which we can all look at. There is no magic formula. It's going to change every season. And it could have easily gone badly for me this season if all of the players that I was waiting on, being patient with, all suddenly started performing. For example, Lingard last season continued to punish me. And I kept waiting. I was like, I want to see if his underlying statistics improve. And they just didn't. And he continued to score goals. Similarly to Smith Rowe this season. So there are times when being patient and not taking a hit does sometimes backfire. But generally speaking, for me, what I've learned from this season is to be patient, wait, almost like a snake, wait to attack and then pounce on that. Take the risk when you think is the right time to take a risk rather than when other people are taking risks. I guess that's what I've learned this season. But I would go onto Premier Fantasy Tools, I would go onto the other website, both links will be in the description, and look at your transfers that you've made this season. If you're someone that has taken tons of hits and you can see every time you've taken a hit, you've got a red arrow, then maybe stop taking so many hits. If you see that every time you take a hit, it tends to go well, maybe trust your gut feeling a little bit more and start taking a few more hits. Obviously not too many, but I think this is very person-specific, manager-specific, but I do think it's something that you should address in your own FPL management as well. So with captaincy, yes, it's specific to me, but I think we can learn a little bit about it as well, and it makes for an interesting discussion point. I've been fairly neutral about the whole perma-captain Salah and whether we should captain Salah. And I do captaincy analysis in my game week preview videos. If you're new to the channel and you're enjoying this so far, make sure you subscribe because I do discuss captaincy on a weekly basis. And when we have time, I do an in-depth analysis of which is the best captaincy each week. And generally speaking, my advice is pretty sound. It's just whether I take my own advice. But I do think it makes for an interesting topic of discussion. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about my captaincy, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion around Salah as well. So my total captaincy points so far, including this week, is 326, as you can see in the top left corner. Not including this week, it's 312. Obviously, Antonio's still hopefully got one game to play if it goes ahead. Obviously, COVID might cancel that game, but hopefully if it goes ahead, I'll still have a little bit more points to add to that. That is 24.36% of my total points for the season. I'm pretty happy with that. I think anything above 25% is really good. Anything above a quarter of your points being down to your captaincy is really, really impressive. Anything over 30% is either means you've got a really low score or you've been very, very impressive with picking your captaincy. So let me know down below what your total captain percentage is. By the way, this is from the Anu Planet FPL, that link down below, not Premier Fantasy Tools, this box on the left. My total vice captain points is only 117 points. So basically, what this suggests is that my captain normally outscores my vice captain. So I'm either picking a really poor vice captain each week, or I'm selecting the right between my captain. You can frame it in two different ways. I think generally speaking, it means I'm happy with the fact that I'm choosing the correct captain each week. My possible captain points, if I'd always captained my vice captain instead, would therefore be 234. What this suggests, as I said, is that I'm picking the right one between my captain and vice captain, which is always a good thing. You don't want to get those 50-50 calls wrong. If I'd have always captained the highest game week scorer each week, this isn't just in my team, this is in general across each game week, the highest scoring player every single week, I'd be on 566 points. This tells me two things. Number one, it's impossible to predict who's the highest scorer each week because I'm on 326 points. If I'd have captained Salah every week, you'd be on 354 points. However, if you captain the highest scoring player each week, you'd be on 566 points, which is remarkable. You're never going to be able to do that. It's always random centre-backs that score a goal or get 3 bonus. You're never going to be able to predict that. But what this does show is that the scope for how well you can do with captaincy is huge. And that's why when people say perma-captain Salah, it's a very safe bet because he's performing quite well at the moment. But there's just so much upside with trying to pick different captains every now and again. As you can see here, you can achieve almost 600 points just through captaincy alone, which is massive. This means between my points total and the highest points you could achieve, there's 254 points that I've lost out on. But like I said, generally speaking, at this point of the season, 326 is pretty impressive. It only doesn't look impressive because if you've captained Salah every single week, you'd be on 354. That means that if I'd have captained my highest total score out of my captain and vice captain every week, it'd be 1,313. This was before game week 21. So obviously this hasn't caught up to the fact that I've got points in game week 21. So my difference between my points total and the above number is minus 32 points. So again, this is just driving home the point that I'm tend to be captaining the right player between my captain and vice captain. It's definitely worth checking out for your team because it might be that you're getting the correct 2 players that you're narrowing it down to, but you tend to get it wrong between your captain and vice captain. I've had that a lot in past seasons, but generally speaking this season, I've been selecting the right captaincy. And my possible total points, if I'd always captained a high score in my team, would be 1,408. So I would have gained an extra sort of 100 points or so, maybe just over 100 points. So this is really interesting to look into. I think generally speaking, the fact that I haven't perma-captained Salah and that I did go against him quite a bit midway through the season, I'm generally pretty happy with my captaincy so far. If we take a look at actually each week, which is from Premier Fantasy Tools on the Captaincy Analyzer section, generally speaking, the only times that I've blanked is when I've gone against Salah. But as I said, do you remember when I said at the start of the video, between game week 6 and I think it was game week 12 or so, that period was where I really struggled with respect to my effectiveness within my team. You can see, game week 6, I captained Ronaldo, he got 4 points. I've got him up in front of me, Salah's points for these weeks as well. So in game week 6, I captained Ronaldo for 4 points, Salah got 7 points. In game week 7, I captained Rafinha for 3 points, or 6 points in total. Salah got 13 points, so he would have got 26 of a captain Salah there. He did play against Manchester City, which was a very, very tricky fixture to try and predict. And then I went back to Salah in game week 8 for the 26 points, which was brilliant. Then in game week 9, I obviously captained Salah, Havertz for 3 points or 6 points doubled. That was when Salah got 24 points, so he would have got 48 doubled. So that, for me, really, if you changed Havertz 6 points there, for Salah's 48 points, there you're looking at an incredible captaincy haul. And I think, generally speaking, outside of game week 9, when I captained Havertz rather than Salah, and I still back the decision to do so, because he was playing against Manchester United away. Yes, they're not great, Manchester United, but that is a fixture that you can back against, I do think. Apart from that, I actually think my captaincy choices have been fantastic, and there have been 3 or 4 weeks when I've gone against Salah and I've outscored him. For example, Foden in game week 20, 22 points. Antonio this week, obviously not many people are captain Salah anyway, but Foden in particular, that 22 points when a lot of people captained Salah was absolutely massive. And outside of that, Ronaldo I captained 1 week, he outscored Salah. So I think I've backed against Salah at the right times this season, apart from game week 9. And I think that is the big regret. But that's a lot of hindsight bias and outcome bias. What I would say on the, is Salah the best permanent captain option? I don't like using points totals too often because I think underlying statistics are more impressive, but just as an idea of what he's achieved since that 24-pointer. So from game week 10 onwards, I'm about to read his points total each week. 5, 5, 8, 6. He then got a 15-pointer against Everton in game week 14. 6, 8, 8, 2, 0, 7. So apart from game week 14, since game week 10, Salah hasn't got a single double-digit haul. And in and around that, he's got 2 5s, 2 6s, a 2, a 0, and a 7 as well. Now, what this does show is, my word, Salah's consistent, because apart from game week 18 and game week 20, and also the blank in 19, so if you take that period from 18 to 20, apart from that, he's returned in every single game week from game week 10 onwards. So what you're getting with Salah is almost guaranteed points each week. But not a single double-digit return. In and around that, Trent was hauling, Cancelo was hauling, James was hauling, Ronaldo was hauling. There were quite a few players. If you look at my list in and around that, I had Ronaldo in game week 16 was a good one. Lacazette in 18 when Salah got the 2-pointer. Foden in game week 20 when Salah got 0 points. Foden got 22. You can back against Salah and do it effectively. And I do not agree that Salah should be your permanent captain, even when he's back from AFCON. Yes, you should own him. And yes, he should be a top captaincy choice every single week. But no, he should not be your captaincy choice every single week. There are always different things to consider. There is always context to consider. And I think you should not necessarily be scared to go against him. And I think that's what I've learnt this season, is that I think I got into a stage after game week 6 to game week 9 when I went against Salah 3 times and it backfired every single time. As you can see, from game week 10 to game week 15, I captained Salah every week. That was due to fear, and I'll admit that. I was struggling with the possibility that if I didn't captain him again, I'd have what happened in game week 19. In game week 9, sorry. I then realised around game week 16, I don't need to captain every week. Yes, he's doing well, but he wasn't doing as well as he was earlier on in the season. And if you look at his points return since then, apart from game week 14, which luckily I did captain him against Everton, it's not been that impressive. Since game week 14, 6, 8, 8, 2, 0, 7. You could have easily gone against him in every single week and you wouldn't have been massively punished. So when he comes back from AFCON, I will consider going against him every week. That does not mean that I won't captain. I might captain him in the next 6 weeks after AFCON because I might think he's the best option. But don't be scared. Don't be scared. Obviously, if he gets back up to those statistics that he was achieving midway through the season when he was getting those hat-tricks, because his expected goal involvement every game was like 1.52, then you just go back to captaining Salah until he starts to drop off again. But I think it's at least worth having a debate about. Generally speaking, I'm happy with my captaincy choice. Let me know down below, what is your captaincy total? The best way to do it up to date is premierfantasytools.com. Go to their captaincy analyzer. Mine is 326, but obviously I still have Antonio captain to go for the second half of game week 21. Let me know your captaincy totals down below. So we're now moving away from my season specifically, and we're going to move to generally how the season has looked thus far, specifically focusing on players that have performed really well so far this season with respect to actual points return, also underlying statistics, and then we'll move on to a little bit about the general state of play and lessons learned as well. So the first thing I wanted to focus on is who have been the best value players this season. Now, the reason I started to do this is I wanted to take a look at a bit about formation and which has been the optimal formation this season. But I found it very, very tricky to do because of the small sample size. I think that's better to do across the whole season. I know we then lose the value, but for example, there is on the website the new Planet FPL, that one, you can also look at what has been the optimal formation for you. But I've used so many different formations that sometimes it says that I only averaged 51 points with that formation. But I've only used it twice, and it might just be that those weeks were specifically quite low scoring. So I found it quite tricky to look specifically at formation. So what I did instead was I looked at where the value has been. Has it been in defence, attack, midfield? Which players have the highest value? And as you can imagine, the players with the highest value are normally in defence because there are so many cheap budget gems in defence as well. Now, the way that I found this out is actually on the Fantasy Premier League site rather than looking elsewhere. Now, generally speaking, I prefer to look at underlying stats, normally at Fantasy Football Fix or Fantasy Football Scout. But here you can actually find this on the Fantasy Premier League site. So when you filter, you can filter by points, you can filter by form, you can filter by transfers in. One of the filters says value season. Now, what this does is it divides the points total by their price. So if Cancelo, I can't remember how many points it was, if he got 150 points, Cancelo, divide that by 7 million, that would be his value for the season. So what this takes into account is not only what someone's total points have been across the season, what it also takes into account is what their value is. So a player that is very cheap that has scored quite a few points is obviously going to have very high value. And what you can do is you can sort this by goalkeepers, defenders, midfielders, attackers, or you can just go through and generally look at across the entire database of FPL who has performed very, very well with respect to their value this season. So what I've done is I've just highlighted the top 8 players and I've just put in a few other really interesting stats that I found when I was researching for this. These are the top 8 players sorted by value this season. Coming in at 17.3 is 2 players. That is Jose Sarr, the goalkeeper for Wolves, which blew my mind here, and Cancelo as well. Now, Sarr has been ticking along quite nicely, and as you can see, if you just glance at this, there are 4 Wolves players in the top 8, and they're all defenders. And that blew my mind as well, because we do not give Wolves enough credit. And that is something that I'm going to, in the lessons learnt section, we'll discuss this. They have gone massively under the radar, and I think I know why it is. But definitely worth noting that at the time of recording, Sarr is definitely the keeper to own. I did say this when I did the captaincy analysis section, if you remember back a few weeks ago, and earlier on in the season as well. Sarr has consistently got very, very impressive expected goals prevented statistic. He's a very good goalkeeper. FPL aside, he saves a lot of high XG opportunities. But generally speaking, he's performing quite well in FPL as well. Not that many save points, not that many bonus points, but so many clean sheets. Wolves are absolute 1-0 merchants. Every single week they seem to win 1-0. Even when they don't win 1-0, it's often 0-0. And I think we need to start paying attention to Wolves' defence. But that means that he is joint with Cancelo for being the best value player this season, which is pretty impressive. You can also see Cancelo is 7 million, and yet he's still the joint top. What that tells you is Cancelo has been scoring so many points each week. To be £7 million and to still be the joint top scorer, the joint top with respect to value, I should say, just means that he must be scoring a lot of points. And as you can see, he scores 6 points on average per match this season. 6 points as an average. That is a clean sheet and 2 appearance points with no booking as an average. That's absolutely excellent. And it shows you that Cancelo is arguably the most essential player this season. Yes, Salah and Trent are fantastic, but if you're looking at value, because obviously Trent and Salah are both more expensive than Cancelo, value-wise, Cancelo is the defender to own. Outside of that, if we just go down a little bit, you can see Cody is the third on this list. He's 4.6 million, which is the reason he's on this list. He's currently scored, as we saw, 77 points. That is 4.1 points per match. But because he's so cheap at 4.6, that puts his value at 16.7. Remember, it's total points divided by 4.6 million. So 16.7. That suggests that Cody might be someone that we should have owned all season. I had him in my Game Week 1 team. I think I kept him until my wildcard in Game Week 8. So I did own Cody for large amounts. The reason that I took Cody out is because he's a very boring pick. He's not going to get you any goals. He's not going to get you any assists. And as a result, he's a bit boring, but he ticks along nicely. And this is a lesson that we're going to discuss in the final section, that I think sometimes we get a little bit carried away with chasing attacking potential from defenders, when maybe we should just be looking at defensive data of the team they play for and whether they're getting clean sheets and whether they're playing. Fourth on the list is another goalkeeper. The only 2 goalkeepers in this list are Jose Sarr, and then fourth on this, Aaron Ramsdale. Obviously, 5.1 million as well alongside Jose Sarr. His value is 16.5. He has scored 4.9 points per match. So very, very impressive there for Ramsdale. Very, very high value as well. So generally speaking, at the moment, if I was to suggest you pick in any 2 players based on this and based on other stuff as well, I think Jose Sarr and Ramsdale are definitely the 2 keepers to own. Fifth on this list is Kilman, another cheap centre-back for Wolves. He's 4.5 million. His value is slightly lower than Cody. He's not got quite as many as points. I think that Cody is slightly more nailed, but Kilman is probably a slightly more attacking threat. I haven't looked at the underlying stats for the 2, but Kilman could be another great option. If you're wildcarding soon, Sarr, Cody or Kilman could be fantastic options on your wildcard. You can then see next on the list is Trent. Despite being 8.3 million, he's still fantastic value, 15.9. He scores 7.3 points per match. Outrageous. Absolutely fantastic from Trent. 8.3 million is still undervalued in my opinion, and most of us probably bought him at 7.5 million or slightly more, 7.6, 7.7, and as a result, he's not even 8.3 million for us. You can consider him even cheaper. I would not take Trent out, even if they had tough fixtures. He's such fantastic value, and every season he'll be up there for the most valuable player in the game, based on value, based on points, and based on price as well. The penultimate player on this list is Saiss. He's the 4th Wolves defender on this, if you include Jose Sarr as well. He's, of course, 5.1 million. He's going off to AFCON as well, so I wouldn't target him now. What I like about Saiss in comparison to Kilman and Cody is Saiss definitely has the greater goal threat. If you watch the Manchester United game on Monday night, he took a free kick, hit the crossbar. He's also absolutely fantastic from corners, and he's just got a great left foot on him. And Saiss, for me, is definitely a more exciting own. What you do have to consider is 0.6 million more than Kilman. He's 0.5 million more than Cody. So you do have to consider, is the goal threat worth it? I do think it probably is. However, if you're looking for a 4th or 5th defender, it's probably not necessary to go for Saiss, because the likelihood that when you need him, you'll catch that goal is probably quite unlikely. The final player on this list is Diaz. Now, very, very boring he was considered at the start of the season, but he's actually picked up a couple of returns. He's 6.3 million, but for a centre-back with limited attacking threat to be quite high up on this list is very, very impressive. It speaks to how good Manchester City's defence has been this season, how many clean sheets he's got. He has been rotated a little bit, but I do think that moving forward, both Diaz and Laporte will be 2 fantastic options in that City defence. But you can see that he is 8th on this list, the 8th and final one that I've listed here. Outside of that, there were a few other quite interesting statistics. As you'll probably see here, there is no defender on this list. Dennis was very, very close. Dennis is joint ninth, so his value is 15.1. So if I'd have made this a 10 list, he would have been in joint ninth. There were quite a few players in joint ninth as well, the likes of Tierney, Ben White, 2 Arsenal defenders were in there as well. So there are a few others at 15.1. I think Ben Rama was 15.1 as well. But apart from Dennis, who was joint ninth for value, the next striker on the list was Antonio at 62nd for value this season. The 62nd most valuable, if we're taking into account price and points this season, was Antonio. He was at 11.8 value. After that, it was Saint Maximan at 11.2. What this says is, for weeks we've been saying there is no value in attack. There's no strikers we want. There are no strikers that are worth the amount that we're paying for them. It's not just Ronaldo and Kane. It is everyone. Even Antonio at a fairly cheap price with really good returns so far. He's 62nd on the list. So this just shows that we're not making it up when we say that we're struggling to pick strikers this season. The strikers are not good value this season. It's clearly there in the data. The next thing to note is that the top 5 midfielders are Ben Rama, Gallagher, Bowen, Smith Rowe and Saka. So there you've got 5 really, really good budget enablers. And these have been really good at various points in the season. Early on in the season, Ben Rama and Gallagher were fantastic. Bowen, Smith Rowe and Saka have been more recent as well. Smith Rowe's been pretty good across the entire season. Their underlying statistics aren't all that impressive. But generally speaking, if you're looking at budget options across the season, potentially even into the second half of the season, these 5 midfielders have performed really, really well. I do think that moving forward, Bowen's probably the slightly better own in comparison to Ben Rama, and I do think that Saka is definitely the better own in comparison to Smith Rowe, and I think Martinelli's even potentially better than Smith Rowe at the moment. But if we're looking at the first half of the season, they were the 5 midfielders which were the best for value. And the final thing to note is that despite being 12.8 million, Salah still has the seventh best value of all attackers this season. So removing defenders, because they're so cheap, they're always going to have better value than Salah because they're 4.5 million. Salah's almost 13 million. So if you remove defenders and goalkeepers, Salah has the 7th best value of all attackers this season. That just says that you need to own Salah. For a £13 million player to have such great value, it just shows that the amount of points that he's getting, it's worth the price tag that you pay for him, especially when you take into account captaincy. It makes him even more valuable as well. So I just thought I'd note there how valuable Salah has been despite the fact that he's so expensive. Hopefully you enjoyed that little bit of a different discussion. I don't normally do this because this isn't underlying statistics, it's actual points return. But it just gives you an idea of who's been most valuable. And for me, 4 Wolves players being in the top 8 has definitely turned my head a little bit. And maybe I haven't given Wolves enough credit this season. And moving into the second half of the season, teams like Wolves, Brentford, Brighton, who have got great defensive data, defenders that definitely have some goal threat as well, or keepers that make a lot of saves. I think they are 3 teams, Brighton, Wolves and Brentford, who might need some further consideration in the latter half of the season. And we'll discuss that in the next few videos and also in the lessons learned at the end of the video as well. So what I've done for this section is I've looked at the players with the highest total expected goal involvement this season. Now, normally I'll look at per 90 statistics because I think it's very useful to know who to transfer in when we're chasing that upside and we're trying to decide who to bring in for another player. But one of the things that I think I've learned across the season, specifically when I've looked back at it retrospectively and reflected on the season, is it's very important to have those glue guys. And that is a term that late risers use, Pranil, if you follow the FPL Wire, if you follow him on Twitter. He talks about glue guys a lot. And I think it's very, very critical, specifically when there's so many postponements, COVID rearrangements, chips being played left, right and centre. It's important to have those guys that unless they are blanking like 3 games in a row, that you just keep in your team. The likes of Trent, Cancelo, these are players that you don't really look at the fixtures. You just say, I'm keeping them because they're great value or they're just getting a lot of returns or they've got great underlying data. I think it's useful to have players like that in your team. And therefore, when we're looking at per 90 statistics, if a player is only playing 1 in every 4 games because they're completely injury prone, or they're playing 1 in every 4 games because they're rotated so often, like a Sterling or potentially someone even like a Phil Foden, then really per 90 statistics aren't worth looking at because they're not playing 90 minutes each week. So I think what is useful sometimes is to look at total underlying statistics because that tells you, number one, who's performing well, but also who is playing a lot, because someone that performs well over 3 games isn't going to have the highest total across the season. That is a long way of just explaining why I'm looking at total stats here. So what I've done is I've looked at the top 8 defenders, midfielders and forwards. This is from Fantasy Football Scout for expected goal involvement across the season. As you can see, Liverpool are incredible from an FPL perspective. This is why we always have pretty much triple Liverpool in our team. If we look at the defenders to start with, what jumps out to me is that Trent is leagues ahead of everyone else. Now, there are a couple of reasons for this. Number one, his underlying expected data is fantastic. He's always got around a 0.3, 0.4 expected assist per 90. He's always got around a 0.1, 0.2 expected goals per 90. That always puts his underlying statistics up there with the very best. It's very close to Ronaldo. It's higher than Harry Kane. It's higher than Raheem Sterling, Mason Mount, Son. This is a defender. We're just talking about attacking potential here. We're removing clean sheets. It shows why Trent is so fantastic, but also there's no competition for him at right back with Liverpool, I should say. In past seasons, someone like Cancelo would be rotated quite heavily. Obviously, that hasn't happened this season, but that's the great thing about Trent is that worry isn't there. They're not going to play Milner or Williams in most games. I think you can pretty much say that if Trent is fit, he'll play 36 out of 38 games, probably close to 38 most seasons as well. So that's what makes Trent so fantastic, and this just reinforces that for me. Not only is he valuable, as we've just discussed in the pass section, but he's also got the highest expected goal involvement for defenders so far this season, which I absolutely love as well. Cancelo in there as well, quite high as well, a lot higher than the other defenders. 6.03 is really, really good. James, Robertson and Reguilon are the three after that, all providing good value despite not playing as many minutes as they usually would. Robertson's obviously had suspensions, injuries, etc. that he's had to suffer with. James hasn't played that many games this season, although he has dropped off remarkably in the last few game weeks, getting a lot of 0 and 1 pointers. Reguilon hasn't played that many minutes, and he hasn't played that many minutes in the more advanced role that he's got now. So in the more advanced role, if he can stay fit, I'd expect that to shoot up. I'd expect that he might go above Robertson, potentially above James if James continues to struggle. You can see we've got Richie in there as well, 3.31. This is mainly down to number one, corners, because he takes a lot of corners and free kicks, so his expected assists are slightly higher than you would expect normally from open play. Also, he plays a lot of minutes, and this comes into account. Like I said, if you want those glue guys, those players in your teams that play a lot, these are the sort of players that might be worth picking. Now, I did put on Twitter, Newcastle looking at Trippier. If Newcastle sign a goalkeeper, potentially, or a centre-back, or just strengthen the defence and midfield in general in the January transfer market, and they sign Trippier, I think Trippier and Richie could be decent options at some point in the latter half of the season, depending how expensive he is. I reckon Trippier would be 5 million, Richie's 4.9. I know Newcastle's defensive data isn't great, but they could be some decent enough options, considering they'll be on set pieces as well. Alonso comes in at 7th in the defenders list and Laporte at 8th as well. So these are, generally speaking, across the first half of the season, the players that have performed quite well from an attacking perspective, but also played a lot of minutes normally as well. So Trent and Cancelo stand out as head and shoulders above the rest really there. When we move on to midfielders, it's actually absolutely remarkable because these are not only the top 3 midfielders, they're the top 3 players across all of FPL, and that is Salah, Mane and Jota. Absolutely insane. The front 3 for Liverpool have the best underlying data across the entirety of the FPL database. Salah's at 18.15 is actually scary. Obviously, he's played pretty much every minute for Liverpool this season, but still 18.15 expected goal involvement so far this season. It's absolutely brilliant. You're looking at almost 1 expected goal involvement per 90, which is absolutely fantastic. Mane at 12.9 is pretty good considering he hasn't played every minute as well. His statistics per 90 do get close to Salah sometimes, so that's worth noting, but obviously he doesn't have to penalty. So when you take away penalties, they're very comparable, but with penalties, Salah does take quite a clear lead there. And Jota, very, very close to Mane in there as well at 12.63. So this does show that Jota is an absolutely fantastic option, specifically when we're looking at expected data. Outside of that, Sterling, a great option. Played quite a few minutes recently as well, but 9.15 is highly impressive considering he hasn't played every minute this season. Mason Mount, 8.95, another great option. He ticks along quite nicely. He will play the majority of the minutes once he's fully fit. He has had a few issues with COVID and injuries and rotation, etc. But I do think, generally speaking, Chelsea's full strength side includes Mason Mount. Son is still performing fairly well at 8.94. And then the 2 budget options, who I think if I were to wildcard now, I would definitely have both of these, is Bowen and Rafinha. I think with the fixtures coming up for both Leeds and West Ham, I just think these are 2 really, really good players to have. They're playing so many minutes for their sides. They are fairly talismanic, specifically Rafinha, but also Bowen recently as well. They're talismanic in their teams. I can't imagine them ever being dropped. I can imagine Bowen being slightly rotated when West Ham have a fully fit side and when they go into Europe as well. That might be a slight issue, but generally speaking, I think Bowen and Rafinha will be 2 fantastic options to own over the latter half of the season. And if I were wildcarding, I would definitely have both. And I've already got Bowen. I'm looking at bringing in Rafinha for the stretch from game week 23 to game week 29 before I probably play my second wildcard. So those are the midfielders. To be honest, you could probably, if Trent wasn't as incredible as Trent was, Salah, Mane and Jota as a triple up could potentially be an option moving forward. You need to look at each of them individually in their own right, and Salah, Mane and Jota are three fantastic options in their own right, and they will continue to perform well despite the fact that all three are from the same team. If we finally move on to the strikers, they've been pretty abysmal, to be honest. But some of the underlying data isn't that bad, and it would suggest that we might start to see, I should say, some returns from the strikers in the near future. Antonio, despite having a slightly tricky second half to the first half of the season, obviously started so well. His expected goal involvement is still 11.32, which is better than Trent, close to Jota, puts him fourth in the Premier League so far this season. Ronaldo at 10.88 is another one with pretty good underlying expected goal involvement. Obviously, the penalties in there definitely help Ronaldo. Outside of that, it's still been pretty good, although probably not worth 12.5 million. Kane is the third on this list for strikers, which just shows that potentially he's been slightly unlucky not to score more, although that's up for debate, I suppose. There's been factors in and around that, which we won't discuss in this video, but Kane has been someone where his expected goal involvement isn't terrible across the season so far. King, fourth on this list. Now, Dennis, I should say, Dennis is right down the bottom. He's about 15th or 16th just for strikers. In the whole Premier League, he's like 50th, 60th. Dennis's underlying stats continue to be terrible, but for some reason, he continues to score. Similar to Lingard last season, but King has got really good underlying statistics still. 7.61 is highly impressive. If you consider the fact that it's close to the likes of Kane, who's over double the price of King, it just shows that King could be really good value moving forward, especially if they do get that double in double game week 22. Jesus and Alba are two cheap, slightly more expensive players. They're not quite that premium price, but between 8.5 and 10 million for Jesus and Alba. They've both got around a 7.5 expected goal involvement across the entire season, which is still pretty good, but probably shows that they're not quite worth that price. Specifically with Alba, it looks like he might move away. We've seen talks of potentially someone like Newcastle signing him, but I do think that his time at Arsenal is coming to an end. And Jesus just gets rotated so heavily with Foden, Sterling up top. On the right, it can be Sterling, it can be Foden as well. You've got Mahrez, who's probably first choice on the right wing. Bernardo Silva can play out there. So with Jesus, it's the rotation issue. And then you can see the two slightly cheaper penalty takers for their team and two cheaper options are Maupay and Tony. Now, they've both been, you could say, trolls in the past where you've expected them to do one they haven't. But generally speaking, two players that are on penalties, playing for teams where they are fairly talismanic for their teams, they could be two good options in the latter half of the season. For now, I don't think either of those interest me too much, though, because they just don't seem to follow through on their expected data. And even their expected data isn't that fantastic. So hopefully that was a nice little summary of the first half of the season. If you're not really big into data, what this essentially tells us is that, like I said, Liverpool are amazing, but Trent, Cancelo, to some extent James as well, the three Liverpool boys, and then Antonio, maybe King as well, are really the players that stand out for me here. But it's good to address this throughout the season. Keep an eye on it as well, because like I said, I do like per 90 statistics because it tells you, it does mitigate playing time. So there are some players on here that have performed really well over 5 or 6 games, but they haven't played any more than that. So I do like to look at per 90 for that reason. But for the same reason, it's really interesting to look at who's played a lot of minutes and also has good underlying statistics, because those are the glue guys that you can keep across the entire second half of the season. Let me know down below, who are your favourite glue guys? Who are those guys that you never take out your team? For me, I like Rafinha in that midfield spot alongside Bowen, and therefore I'm looking to bring in Rafinha alongside Bowen in the future game weeks. So in this final section, what I thought I'd look at is the current state of play with respect to chips usage and also with respect to points totals and how far you are away from certain ranks. To just give you an idea about what you're like in comparison to the other managers in FPL, which is always really, really interesting to compare in my personal opinion. So the first thing to look at is chip usage. So what I've done is I've headed over to Premier Fantasy Tools, who give you an idea about the chips that have been used so far this season by taking a total sample of the FPL database. And it is quite interesting. And generally speaking, not that many chips have been used apart from one, which will be the obvious one which you would expect. So if we start with triple captain usage, which is the top graph with the orange bars, as you can see, the all-time best managers, less than 1% have used their triple captaincy. The bar isn't even visible, which shows that the best managers know that probably the time to use your triple captaincy is in a double game week. If you've used it already, no stress. I'm sure you did all right with it. And if not, it's not the best chip anyway. I think realistically, what you're expecting with a triple captaincy chip, it's worth noting, you're just getting one extra set of your captain scores. So if your captain scores 15 points, which is a big haul, 15 points, you're only gaining 15 points through playing the triple captaincy, because if you didn't play the triple captaincy, you probably would have captained that player anyway, if that makes sense. So triple captaincy doesn't tend to get you that many extra points. So what I would say is don't stress when you're going to play the triple captaincy. Generally speaking, as you can see by the all-time best there, is that the best managers know to keep it for a double game week, and I think that's what my plan will be to do as well. 4% of the top 10k have already played it, and 5% of the top 100 have already played it. Largely because if you're in the top 100, you've either played extra chips or you have done incredibly well. I know a lot of the top managers have played their bench boost already, maybe played their free hit as well. To get to that sort of points total without using any of these extra chips would be highly impressive. So you can see the top 100 have often played more chips because to get to that point, you've got to have done something extra special. With respect to the bench boost has been played slightly more often than the triple captaincy. So we're approaching 10% of the top 10k have used their bench boost, and we're approaching 25% of the top 100 have used their bench boost. So a lot of the people that are in the top 100 are there because they've played their bench boost. Of course, there are some outside of that. FPL Mate, as an example, he hasn't played any chips outside of his first wildcard. He's in the top 100, so you can definitely get there. You either need to make incredible decisions, get a lot of luck, or play your chips, and it's normally a combination of all of those. So the top 100, as I said, 25% or approaching 25% have played their bench boost. The all-time best, slightly more of these have played their bench boost than their triple captaincy. We're approaching 5% of the all-time best have played their bench boost. A lot of them were in the first game week where they knew what the starting 11s were likely to be. Where it starts to get interesting is then when we move on to free hit usage, where the numbers are significantly higher. So 40% of the top 10k have played their first free hit. This is just the first free hit, by the way. The second one has not been added on Premier Fantasy Tools as far as I can see. 40% of the top 100 have also played their first free hit. And then we're at over 30% of the all-time best. So we're looking at about a third of the all-time best managers have played their first free hit. What this tells me is potentially I should have played my free hit, and I think 18 or 19 would have been a good time to play the free hit. Outside that, what that tells me is that I now, maybe I was disadvantaged then, I now have an advantage where I have an extra free hit over at least 33% of the all-time best based on this sample size, which is really, really cool. So if you do have both your free hits, you're in a really, really good place here, where in general, in comparison to the top 10k and top 100, you're a major advantage over 40%, and all-time best are a major advantage over a third of them. So I guess what I'm saying is if you've used your free hit, don't stress. If you use your bench boost and triple captaincy, others have as well. But if you're in a position similar to myself, where you've only used your first wildcard and you've got 2 free hits, wildcard, bench boost, triple captaincy, you're in a better position than a lot of others, specifically with respect to those 2 free hits. So if you've got them, keep them and use them in game weeks where you can really take advantage where other managers might struggle to field or might struggle to attack them, such as double game week 22. You can also see some other graphs there. This is generally about top 100 and top 10k managers chips usage. We won't go into too much detail here, but if you head over to Premier Fantasy Tools, they have a lot of breakdowns about chip usage, captaincy, transfers, etc. at different ranks, and it's definitely worth taking a look at. I find the free hit percentage very interesting. Let me know down below, by the way, have you used any of your chips? If so, which chips have you used? And also put your rank alongside it. I'll be interested to see if those that are doing really well have used their chips or if they're just playing fantastically this season. So we discussed this about, I think it's about 6 weeks ago now, in just a regular video about how tightly packed we were together. And I said that it wouldn't continue to be that way forever and that we would slowly start to see the different ranks start to spread out a little bit more and disperse, because that's generally, you're not going to always see the top 10k so close to the top 1 million, because managers will start to spread out and those top managers will start to break away, and the managers that are ranked quite lowly will either give up or it will start to show the difference. The skill gap always increases more so over time. In the first game week, we're really tightly grouped together. By the end of the season, there's quite big gaps. So we're starting to get to the stage now where the ranks are starting to split up a little bit more. What I would say is there's still no need to panic at all. You can still get to your target rank. You could get massive gains. I know there are people that have been ranked like 2.5 million at this point and somehow managed to break towards the top 100k. So there are definitely ways to break forward if you want to and if you make the right decisions, but we are starting to get to a stage now where rank starts to become a little bit more important. We're not at the stage now where I would fixate over rank, but we are at a stage where you need to start making decisions where you're starting to be slightly more aggressive if you're ranked really, really lowly, but we'll discuss that now. So what I've got here, taken from livefpl.net/rank. If you don't use this website, definitely do. The creator and owner of it, Ragabolly, is a top man, and he works so hard. This is completely free. He should be charging for it because it's an incredible site. Livefpl.net. The main reason that we use it is for your live rank each week. It is literally up to date within seconds, unless there's loads of traffic and it crashes. Within seconds, you can see live bonus points. You can see the points added during the games, which FPL do not offer with respect to bonus points, which is really, really useful. You can also see how that affects your ranking game. So when Salah scores, will that increase your rank, reduce your rank? I think it's just such an incredible site. So go use livefpl.net, and in doing so, you're supporting Ragabolly. But I've taken this screenshot from there, which tells you what the total points is at the time of recording midway through Game Week 21 for each of the different ranks. So you can see first in the world is 1,478, all the way down to 4 million at 989 points. Now, I'm not going to say specifically what I think is a good rank at this stage because it is largely dependent on what chips you've got, what sort of manager you are. Is it your first season? Is it your 14th season, 15th season? What are you aiming to achieve, etc.? So it's largely dependent on who you are and your experience to date. But I think generally speaking, if you're in the top 2 million, you can still achieve a really, really good rank. I think if you're outside of that, start making decisions for fun, start using this as a learning curve. Inside the top 2 million, you can still get a good rank. Inside the top 1 million, anything is achievable. Really, you could get the top 10K if you're 1 million now. It would require a lot of good decisions. It would require a lot of luck on your side as well. It would require you to nail your chip strategy, but it is still achievable. So I wouldn't stress if you're around sort of 700, 800K, which I know a lot of people are. I would still attack it and still do your best and still try and enjoy the game as well and around that as well. So this is the points totals for all of the different ranks, as you can see there. So you can look at what your total points is right now. So I think mine's 1,316, which puts me in between 50 and 10K. So I'm around 9 points inside the top 50K, and I'm around sort of 30 points away from the top 10K. Of course, like I said, I've got 5 players left for this game, hopefully, although Calvert-Lewin looks like he's picked up an injury, which is absolutely fantastic. But I know, therefore, that I'm pushing towards the top 10 and I'm just safe inside the top 50. What I've done alongside it is I've said what I think my aim would be based on the different ranks. Now, what I would say, very, very importantly for me, is that you shouldn't just set long-term goals. Now, this isn't just in FPL, this is in everyday life. This is some major advice that I give based on my psychological background, is if you constantly set long-term goals, you're always talking about the journey, the destination, you don't experience the journey. You don't set those short-term goals. You don't look at improving the way you make decisions. You're constantly focused on the end outcome. And in doing so, you're not going to improve your decision-making process and know why you're making the decisions you make. So for me, this should be your end long-term goal, but you should set mini goals within. I want to go from 1 million to 750K, then 750K to 500K. And not only setting rank goals, but also make decisions like, I want to be a little bit safer with my captaincy, or I want to take slightly less hits. These are the sort of goals which will help you to achieve the end rank that you want. But generally speaking, this is the target rank that I think you should be aiming for based on these different things. So if I was ranked at 1 million right now, my target for the end of the season would probably be a realistic target, be top 100K. Now, that is still quite an achievement if you manage to do that, because what you're looking there is a 125-point difference between 1 million and 100K, which works out across the remaining 17 game weeks, if you remove the rest of game week 21, at 7.35 points per game week. Now, that might sound like a lot, but what you're talking about there is an extra goal and a couple of bonus points from a player. Realistically, though, what you're going to get is you might gain 2 or 3 points each week. What that is one big week. 1 week where you get your triple captaincy perfectly nailed on a differential, or you play the bench boost and you scored 25, 30 points from your bench boost. That's realistically what you're going to use to gain those points. It doesn't have to be 7 points every week. It can be 3 points, 3 points, 3 points, 30 points, 3 points, 3. Do you see what I mean? So it doesn't need to be 7 points every week. But what this shows you that it is achievable. 7 points every week isn't a massive amount, but it is an optimistic goal. So what I would say is top 250K, if you're ranked 1 million now, would be very, very impressive. Even top 500K. But do go for that top 100K because it's definitely achievable. If you're ranked 500K now, I think top 10K might be a nice target. That works out slightly more at 8.12 points per game week because you're 138 points away there. So what this shows is if you're ranked 500, 600K, you can still achieve top 10K. It's definitely achievable, although it is optimistic. If you're ranked 100K, I'd go for top 1K. That's only 103 points. The gap between 100K and 1K is less than between 500K and 10K. So if you're ranked 100K, 150K, don't just set for top 10K, go for the top 1K, because you can see that's only 6.06 points per game week, which is literally a player, an extra defender getting 2 appearance points and a clean sheet, or an assist and a couple of bonus points, or assist, a clean sheet and a couple of bonus points. So it's definitely achievable, but even that 6 points per game week, I would know is an optimistic goal, but you might as well set your targets high. And if you achieve it, great. And if you're not, you fall slightly short, but you're still pretty impressive. The final one is if you are ranked inside the top 10K, I just want to discuss, can you realistically look to finish first? And the answer is definitely yes. The issue you have with actually winning it is between top 10K and first, you have potentially 10,000 other managers who might also do really well. So you're not only trying to track first, you're trying to beat all of the managers in between as well. That's also obviously the issue with all of the other ranks, but specifically when you're going for literally first in the world, you do have the issue of one manager could absolutely smash it and they could already be ranked in the top 100. So it's probably slightly optimistic, but you might as well go for it. And I think with FPL, because the real life consequences aren't that high, you really should just set optimistic targets and really go for it and really try your best to achieve and never give up. Absolutely never give up in FPL because you never know what might happen. So I suppose what I'm showing here is that we're all still fairly tightly packed, but we are at a point in this season now where we're starting to break up a little bit. Earlier on, 1 million to 100k was less than 100 points. We're looking at sort of 70, 80 points. You can see we're starting to break up slowly. So this is the point of the season where you need to get your head screwed on. You need to start making sound, logical decisions. You need to start thinking about what your target is. If you're 300 points off your target, now's probably the time to start taking a few risks. Maybe start playing your chips a little bit more risky, like maybe a triple captain on a differential when everyone else is going Salah. I wouldn't normally recommend that, but if you're way off your target, maybe now this is the time to start making some slightly more riskier decisions. For me, I'm currently sat at 30, 35k, I would say, after my players play. I could potentially be top 20k by the end of the game week if they play really well. I think my realistic target is top 5k. I would really like to achieve, but I will be still going for the top 1k. I'd like to achieve 3 digits. I might fall short. I might not even get in the top 100k, but for me, that would be a great rank finish. Top 10k would be sort of a fairly good one considering where I am now. Top 5k realistic, top 1k would be absolutely amazing. Anything above that would be absolutely ridiculous. Let me know down below, what is your current rank and what is your target rank for the end of the season? I'd like to see how optimistic you guys are in the comments as well. So, based on everything we've discussed in this video, which is a hell of a lot of stuff, also some additional things which I've not discussed here, just generally introspective knowledge of who I am as a manager, who I am as a person, what decisions I've made across this season that have gone well and what haven't. Here are some lessons that have been learned alongside some advice with them. Like I said, it's very tricky to know when something is just a random miscellaneous event that isn't going to happen again in the future, or whether it's actually a lesson that should be learned and applied to future situations as well. It's very tricky to try and work out, like I said, if that trend is going to continue in the future. So do take all of these with a pinch of salt. By all means, disagree. FPL is a game of opinions as well as facts, and it's up to you how you want to play the game. The first thing is, specifically whilst COVID's an issue, but just generally speaking, I think bench does matter more so than we potentially give it credit for. I said this earlier on in the season, then continued to start to bring in players like Gilmore and Gelhardt that just weren't playing a lot at the time, bringing in really cheap defenders that just didn't have much attacking threat or clean sheet potential. Not only do you need players that play on your bench this season, but you need players that you're happy stepping in. Because there's no point saying, yeah, I've got Gilmore on my bench, he plays every week. Yeah, but if he's going to be needed most weeks, which they have been recently, are you happy getting those 2 points every week? Probably not. You'd probably rather have to downgrade, like, for example, Sterling to Son in your starting 11, and as a result, you could upgrade someone like Brownhill or Gilmore to a Smith Rowe. That's the sort of thing where you're using the value, taking a little bit of value out your team and putting it on your bench. I don't think you need to go crazy with it. You don't need £7 or £8 million players on your bench. But for me, a bench is very important, and the thing that I've learned moving forward, specifically for when I wildcard, is I will have a significantly stronger bench. This is also useful for when you decide to bench boost, but I just think generally speaking, a bench is quite important this season. The second thing is, captaincy can be a very, very good way to gain rank, but equally a way to lose rank as well. I think you need to realise when you're deciding to captain a safe option or a differential option that captaincy can be season defining when you get it wrong if you're going against someone like Salah with high ownership. So I'm not going to tell you which way I think you should go. I want you to see it as a tool because it is a tool. It is a way to definitely make your way up the ranks, but it's definitely a way to lose rank. And look at me in game week 9. If you didn't captain Havertz and you captain Salah, and you maybe don't see the risk associated with not captain Salah, but look at the way that my game week went from 60k to 200k. I'm lucky enough that I bounced back quickly. If I'd have had another couple of bad game weeks, I could have been sat at 500k rather than bouncing back quickly, which I was able to do due to making a couple of other good decisions. So what I would say is just be wary with how much of an important decision captaincy can be. If you're a fairly risk-averse manager, potentially just captain the safer option each week. I'm not talking about ownership here. I'm talking about the player that you think will consistently return, and maybe look elsewhere for how to make your way up the ranks. Maybe look to bring in a differential option in defense or attack potentially. That's just my personal opinion on it. Is just beware of how much of a swing you can have in captaincy. Third is to be patient. This is very manager specific in that you could have taken a hit every single week this season and you could potentially be in the top 1k. It's completely manager dependent. But for me, I've had quite a lot of success this season with being patient. What I've realized is you can time your risks. There will be times when it becomes apparent that a risk is worth taking and you don't need to force it. There are not only 38 game weeks in a season, but there are different game weeks where risks are slightly more useful than others. Double game weeks is a great example. Taking a -12 in a double game week might only end up being a -6 if you're taking out players that don't play, or you're bringing in players that potentially play twice where others play only once. They're the sort of weeks where you can take those risks. Or like I said, if there is a week where Salah's got a really terrible fixture and there's someone with a better fixture. Yes, it didn't work for me in game week 9, but those are the times when I'm happy taking risks. Sometimes we see that we're falling down the ranks. I'm 400k and it's game week 20. Yeah, but you've still got 18, 19 game weeks left, so you don't need to force it in that game. You're going to have, like I said, not only 18, 19 game weeks, but within those game weeks, you might find 3 or 4 opportunities to take risks. There will be hundreds of times later on in the season when you can take risks, and it's about timing those and not forcing those risks. So for me, generally speaking, I've learned, and advice I would give is to be a patient manager and time the risks. Time when to be aggressive, don't force those. When to time them is a difficult thing that you'll only learn with experience, whether it's a combination of gut feeling and stats, whatever it may be, you'll find the way that you time them. But what I would say is definitely don't force them. Tip 4 is taking hits is not an inherently negative thing. I know this contradicts what I said about being patient, but what I would say is that a hit in and of itself is not the negative thing. What is the negative thing is potentially sometimes rushing a player out of your team, or rushing a player into your team, or potentially chasing points from previous weeks. There are lots of reasons that a hit could be negative, but the hit in and of itself, losing 4 points is not always a negative if the potential player that you're bringing in is going to reap the rewards and bring those 4 points back to you, if you're going to captain them, or potentially you just think they'll make up the points in future game weeks, or they'll allow you to restructure. There are lots of potential benefits to taking a hit, and the hit in and of itself is not a bad thing. So that is my quick bit of advice on hits. Tip 5 is consider defenders that tick along from strong defenses as a 4th and 5th defender. This is based on what we saw about that value. So if you've skipped this part now, go back to the timestamp where we talk about value players across the season so far, because there were 4 defenders from Wolves. Sarr plus 3 centre-backs, Saiss, Kilman and Cody, were all in the top 8 for value this season with respect to points and price. What that tells me is, because apart from Saiss, Cody and Kilman do not have particularly high attacking threat, that tells me that maybe when you're picking a 4th and 5th defender, you don't go for the player with the high attacking stats, because realistically, that 4th and 5th defender is only going to play once in every 3 or 4 game weeks, likely. Obviously, when COVID's around, it might be slightly more. The likelihood that you catch an attacking return in the week that you need the defender is quite low. The likelihood that you catch a clean sheet if you pick a player from a team that is performing really well and keeping a lot of clean sheets is probably higher than the attacking return. So maybe for me moving forward, I might start to think that the 4th and 5th defender in my team, maybe a centre-back that plays for a really, really good defensive team and is fairly cheap. Someone like an Eric Dyer, Connor Cody, Kilman, someone like that for a team where you know they're going to play, they've got fairly good bonus points, they're going to get the appearance points and clean sheets, and they'll just tick along nicely. So that's maybe something that won't translate in future seasons, but for this season in particular, that looks to be the way so far. If you've gone for someone like a Lamptey or an Aït-Nouri, and you're going for those players with higher attacking threat, it's not necessarily paid off this season. So maybe on my wild card, depending on how late I play it, I might pick a fairly safe player for a good defence, such as a Brighton defender, a Wolves defender, maybe a Brentford defender, because they've got fairly good underlying data as well. Moving on to tips 6 onwards, or I should say 6, 7, 8, 9, and that is a typo for me, I apologise. So tip number 6 is FPL is a game of uncertainties and luck for large parts. We know this anyway. Generally speaking, even without COVID, even without the postponements, there is a massive amount of luck involved in FPL. You are trying to predict the future. Yes, you can bring in players with good underlying statistics, but largely that is out of your control. There is no way for you to say Salah is going to score this weekend. There's no way to do it. Yes, he might have a good fixture. Yes, he might be in form. Yes, he might be motivated. But he could break his ankle in the first 2 seconds, God forbid. But that would be something out of your control. So you need to realise that FPL is a game of skill, but also large amounts of luck. When you chuck in things like COVID, the season is a nightmare. And trying to predict what's going to happen and trying to control everything is largely impossible. So what you do is you try to be at peace with the fact that you have limited influence. There are only so many things you can do. You can pick a sound team each week, you can try to field 11 players, and you can try and pick the best captaincy option. Outside of that, game postponements, double game weeks randomly being announced, your players being out due to COVID, you can't control these things. Yes, it sucks. Yes, you don't want it to happen. And no, we are not all in the same boat, because some people have worse experiences than others with COVID and postponements. But we are all in the same boat in the fact that we can't always influence the outcome. In fact, we can never influence the outcome. All we can do is try to make sound, logical decisions. This is known as the illusion of control in psychology, and you need to try and remember that we do not have control over the end outcomes of FPL. Tip number 7 is to find out the element of the game which brings you joy. Is it gut feeling? Is it trusting your gut every week with your captaincy? Does that bring you joy? Then do that. Is it creating content? The thing that has made me enjoy this season so much is not really FPL in and of itself necessarily. I've had a fairly boring season. My rank has ticked along. I've not had that many exciting game weeks. I love creating YouTube videos for you guys. It brings me such pleasure and joy. It brings an additional excitement to FPL that I didn't have before. If you want to create content, go and do it. Drop me an email if you want to know how to create content. I'm always happy to try and help. If creating content brings you joy, do that. If watching content brings you joy, just binge watch YouTube. You don't have to do the research yourself. Find the fun in the game and utilize that, and that will allow you to have a better FPL experience regardless of what else is going on in the world and COVID and postponements, whatever it may be. Tip 8, says 7 here, it should be 8, is to plan medium term as well as long term. I would still avoid short-term moves, i.e. I wouldn't transfer a player in just for 1 week, but what I would start doing in comparison to what I usually do is I'd start looking at 2 to 3 week moves with COVID at the moment. Now, if you're watching this later in the season, which I doubt you would, but if you're watching it later in the season, that might change. If you're watching it in a future season, which again, I doubt you really would, then it might not apply at all. But with COVID, with postponements, with everything going on, particularly over the busy Christmas period as well, looking over 2 to 3 weeks might be more worthwhile than looking over 7 or 8 game weeks as I usually would. But what I would do is a combination of both. I would have players that are good long term in case that the games do all go ahead as planned. But I would also look at some high upside in the coming weeks because we don't know what's going to happen. In 5 or 6 game weeks, FPL might be paused, the season might be paused, there might be more postponements. So I still wouldn't look really short term, but I would start looking a little bit medium term would be my advice that I've seen over the last few weeks at least anyway. And then the final tip is to be especially cautious of 2 really interesting biases for me. I discuss it a lot in my book, The Mind Game, which you can purchase, link in the description, is plan continuation bias and the Semmelweis reflex. Plan continuation bias is the idea that we're always creating plans, and sometimes we can create a plan really nice and early that looks absolutely fantastic. Now, forget FPL for a second, just creating plans in life. I want to do this, I want to go to university, I want to have this job, I want to be with this person for the rest of my life. We create these plans, and sometimes information will arise, which means that that plan no longer makes sense. Right? Maybe something crops up that you get a better job and you don't need to go to uni. If we go back to FPL, maybe a late wildcard just doesn't work anymore. Maybe I need to play my wildcard early. Don't stick to a plan just because that was the original course of action. Be open-minded, and that links to the Semmelweis reflex. The Semmelweis reflex is the idea that we reject new information. This comes from a German doctor known as Ignaz Semmelweis. Basically, this was around the time of germ theory. They found pretty convincing evidence that germs were transmitted through hands. And a lot of the people at the time said that no, gentlemen couldn't transmit germs between men. A gentleman's handshake is sacred and pure, and there's no way that germs can be spread that way. 15 years after Semmelweis suggested this, germ theory was founded, and they realized that indeed, if you did just wash your hands, it does reduce, it was childbed mortality at the time, but it reduces the spread of germs. So what this suggests is that naturally our tendency is to reject new information that doesn't fit with our existing beliefs. We have these pre-existing beliefs in FPL that we need to do it this way, we need to do this, and we'll reject new information. So it links nicely. Say I create the plan that I want to wildcard in game week 30. I want to wildcard in game week 30, and I try and stick to that plan repeatedly. But new information starts to crop up that game week 27 there's a fixture swing, game week 28 there's a new double game week. If this new information is telling me that my original plan is no longer working, then I'll change it. I'm not that stubborn. I'm not that proud that I won't change my plan. And that is my advice to you guys, is create a plan, try and stick to it as long as it works, and try and have structure in your decision making and your strategy across the season. But if some information is arising which tells you that your original plan no longer works, do not be stubborn enough to stick to it despite that new information. So my general advice for all of FPO, if I could give you one tip as a manager, is to be open-minded, adaptive and dynamic. Constantly absorb new information, constantly be willing to change your plan, and in doing so, you'll be able to not only have a structure, but you'll be able to adapt that structure with the new information. So those are my 9 tips rather than 8 there that I've learned across the season, both through what I've said in this video, but also what I've learned just by reflecting on myself. Let me know if you have any other top tips. I could give 15, 20, but these are probably my top 9 tips so far for this season. So guys, there you have it. That is an incredibly long-form discussion around my mid-season review. Looking firstly at my season, then also looking a bit more generally at the players that have performed well, where we are with respect to current chip usage and points totals, and also some lessons learned and some advice as well. If you enjoy these long-form discussions where we go a little bit more off kilter, we talk about things that don't necessarily fit into a specific game week, then let me know down below, because I love recording these videos. I love it when I don't have a time pressure of an impending game week coming up, because recently I haven't even been able to do the game week preview videos. It's been spitting out team selection videos, not having time to create the graphics I want, not having time to form the discussions that I want to, and I love spending more time on these videos, and I spent a long time on this video, as you can hopefully tell, doing the research, creating the graphics. So if you enjoy these videos, do let me know down below. Like I said, hopefully in a few days there will also be a video on Psychology 101, which will probably be a discussion around gut feeling and the role of gut feeling in FPL, which is an incredibly interesting conversation, and one which I've studied quite a lot at university, the role of gut feeling in decision making. So look out for that. And just generally, thank you so much for the support. We're now entering a new year, and I have so many goals that I want to achieve with this channel, but the number one thing that I want to keep is the sort of interaction that we have. So comment all down below. I'll try and get around to commenting and responding to your comments, because there's not as much of a pressure again with the upcoming game week, and I'll try and respond to all your comments. And I just appreciate the support so much. If you do want to support me and you want to know how, you can like, comment, and subscribe. Those 3 things are completely free. Helps to support me, helps to support the channel. Outside of that, you can purchase a copy of my book. The links are in the description. The Mind Game: Gaining a Psychological Edge in FPL. And the 5th and final thing you can do is become a member of the channel. For a small fee each month, you can help support the channel, and you also get some perks in return. Those are all listed in the description as well. Thank you so much for watching this video. Until next time, guys. Cheers. Bye-bye.